He says to Jesus, "If you are the Son of God, turn these stones to bread." He's saying to Jesus, if you are who you say you are, then prove it. A few weeks ago, I hadn't eaten all day, and I had to go find myself some food very quickly because of all of the sinning that I was doing because I was hungry. I was hangry, right? And my hunger was making me, I was gonna say something crazy to my husband or yell at my kids or walk out of my job or start cheering for the Oilers or something equally insane. That was just, I can make Canadian jokes now because I'm a Canadian, so you can cheer for whoever you like. I'm not very invested. So why does Jesus decide to do this while he's hungry? Because I can't even make it a couple meals without feeling like sinning in my anger. Again, I think Jesus is doing something intentional here. I think he's reminding us of Israel's story. Moses fasted 40 days when he was on Mount Sinai receiving God's law. We see, like we said, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. So there's a picture there that Jesus is giving us. But we also see that fasting as a practice is an intentional time of committing ourselves to God. Not just our spirits or our souls, but actually offering our whole bodies up to him as a living sacrifice, which the book of Romans talks about. And we know that Jesus actually, as he moves into this temptation, he's going to have to depend on the Father and the Spirit. He is not going to overcome this temptation in his own physical strength. He's weak physically. This temptation will have to be conquered through dependence on God. So we get into these temptations or these tests that the devil set before Jesus. Jesus is hungry. He's been fasting. So the devil says, okay, if you're the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread. At first, this temptation seems pretty straightforward. Jesus is hungry. He needs food. This is kind of his most pressing physical need, right? It's not wrong to need food. It's not bad to need food. We need it. But look here how the devil phrases this. He says to Jesus, if you are the Son of God, turn these stones to bread. He's saying to Jesus, if you are who you say you are, then prove it. In the chapter right before this one, in Matthew 3, Jesus has been baptized in the Jordan River. And you remember what happened at the baptism of Jesus? He comes up out of the water. The Spirit descends like a dove. And then God's voice speaks from heaven and he says, this is my Son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Jesus has just been told who he is, whose he is, before he heads out into the wilderness. And right after this baptism, right after God has confirmed the identity of Jesus, here comes the tempter, trying to get him to question that truth. We're having baptisms in a few weeks, and Pastor Dan often tells us to pray for the newly baptized in the weeks after their baptism, because this is what the enemy does. They have just confirmed, I follow Jesus, and then he'll come along and try to get him to question it. I have talked to a few Christians, people who know the Lord, people who have walked with him a long time, people who love him, who question their salvation. And they say things, like, if I were really a Christian, I wouldn't struggle with depression. Or I wouldn't give in to temptation. Or I wouldn't still deal with issue. I'd have more to show for my faith. It causes them great anxiety. They are tempted to believe that they do not belong to God. But like we've been talking about in the book of Ephesians, when we trust in Christ for our salvation, and that means that we actually trust that he has done it. I could sit here and grit my teeth all day long trying to resist temptation. That will never make me holy enough for heaven. My sin has separated me from God severely. When I trust in what Jesus has done on the cross, I believe it, I confess it, and then I ask him to help me walk in his way. He makes me a new person. He calls me his child. I'm his own. That is my identity. I'm not who I was. I belong to Christ.